Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so the Titanic. We literally all know the pop culture mythology, right? The massive blockbuster movies, the sweeping romances, the iconic iceberg. But today, we're going to look completely past that Hollywood lens. Our goal here is to examine the factual, cascading engineering and human failures that doomed this magnificent vessel, basically transforming it from a modern marvel into one of history's absolute greatest tragedies.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that we are looking at the ship in its absolute prime. This is actually the last known photo of the RMS Titanic afloat in 1912. I mean, just look at the sheer scale of it cutting through the water. It's a picture of supreme confidence, a total industrial triumph. And tragically, this is one of the very last times this ship would ever see daylight.
Because, just days after that photo was taken, the completely unthinkable became reality. Over 1,500 people would plunge into the freezing Atlantic Ocean to their deaths. It remains this staggering, chilling number that literally shocked the globe and changed the world forever. So how did we get from that picture of perfection to this massive loss of life? Let's trace it back. Part 1. Ambition and Rivalry. The Transatlantic Boom. Okay, let's dive into this and rewind to the early 1900s. The transatlantic passenger trade was just booming. Thanks to new steel and steam power technologies, the market for international travel was both highly profitable and fiercely competitive. It was essentially an all-out war for dominance between two major companies. On one side, you had the Cunard Line, and they focused intensely on speed. In 1907, they launched the Mauretania and the Lusitania, the fastest ships in the world. Well, the White Star Line needed a massive counterpunch to that, so the company's chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, and shipbuilder, William James Peary, devised a plan over dinner that very same year. The idea was simple. If they couldn't beat Cunard on speed, they would absolutely crush them with unmatched luxury and unprecedented size. And this ambitious plan is what birthed the Olympic-class liners.
Part 2. Marvel of Engineering. Unparalleled Might.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an engineering reality. To bring this ambitious vision to life, designer Thomas Andrews and the Harland and Wolff shipyards in Belfast kicked off construction on a scale the world had rarely seen. Think about the raw numbers for a second. The Titanic displaced an immense 52,000 tons. It was 882 feet long and driven by engines capable of producing 15,000 horsepower each. The sheer industrial power of these enormous Olympic-class ships was so incredibly great that when they were in port, the vortex created by their engines actually sucked in and nearly destroyed nearby ships. And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible duality of the Titanic. On one hand, you have thousands of tons of heavy steel, roaring coal furnaces, and deafening industrial power. But on the other hand, you have these meticulous, opulent details brought aboard for its wealthy passengers. Get this, the cargo manifest included 63 cases of champagne, 15 cases of rabbit hair, a pair of grandfather clocks, an entire Renault automobile, and, oh yeah, 7 million individual pieces of mail. It truly was a floating palace.
But that floating palace was built on a fatal compromise. Much of the public's absolute confidence rested on this widely repeated myth that the Titanic was unsinkable. Now, this claim was heavily based on 16 watertight compartments designed to protect the ship from flooding. Sounds foolproof, right? But here is the critical engineering flaw. Those watertight bulkheads did not go all the way up to the ceiling. Actually, scratch that. They only extended up to E-deck. This meant that if the ship pitched forward, water could simply spill over the top of one compartment directly into the next, exactly like an overfilling ice cube tray.
Part 3. The Fatal Night, April 14th, 1912.
We're now on the night of the disaster. Captain Edward J. Smiths, a veteran famously known as the Millionaire's Captain, was navigating this magnificent ship through the dark, frigid waters of the North Atlantic. And these were waters heavily known to contain dangerous icebergs. So we really have to ask this crucial question. Why was the Titanic speeding through an active ice field at 22 knots? For decades, the assumption was just simple hubris, that Chairman Ismay was pressuring Captain Smith to arrive in New York a day early to generate splashy headlines. But fascinating new research points to another hidden danger. A massive coal fire may have been raging in one of Titanic's boiler rooms since before it even left port. Firemen fought it at sea, and this continuous intense heat could have severely weakened the hull's steel, while simultaneously forcing Smith to maintain high speeds just to quickly burn through those burning coal bunkers.
So the crucial point is that there were ample warnings. Let's follow the timeline. At 9:40 p.m., a ship called the Masaba sends an ice warning. At 10:55 p.m., the Californian warns of ice, and get this, the Titanic's wireless operator actually scolds them for interrupting. Why on earth would they do that? Well, because the operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, worked for the Marconi Company, and their primary job was relaying passenger messages, not ship navigation. They literally prioritized sending wealthy passengers telegrams over critical ice warnings right up until 11:40 p.m. when the iceberg was finally spotted dead ahead. Part 4. A desperate struggle. Mathematical doom. The moment the iceberg is spotted, the first officer orders a hard starboard turn and reverses the engines, which ironically slows down their turning speed. The starboard side violently scrapes the ice. And almost immediately after that scrape, designer Thomas Andrews makes a quick, agonizing realization. 5 of those watertight compartments are ruptured. Because the bulkheads only reach E-deck, he knows instantly, mathematically, the ship is doomed to founder. What follows is a tragic cascade of agonizing isolation. Distress calls desperately go out, but listen to the rescue options they had. Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, is 500 miles away. The Burma is 70 miles away. The Carpathia hears the call, but it's a slower ship, 58 miles away, and a full 3 hours out. The Mount Temple speeds toward them but gets totally blocked by an ice field. And most heartbreaking of all, a mystery ship, believed to be the Samson, which was out illegally hunting seals, is close enough to see them but ignores the calls. Meanwhile, the Californian, which is nearby, has its wireless turned off for the night and completely fails to respond to Titanic's visual flares. Back on board, human error fiercely compounded this mechanical failure. The Titanic only carried 20 lifeboats. That's a total capacity of 1,178 people, which was barely over half the souls on board. Worse yet, a scheduled lifeboat drill had literally been canceled earlier that very day. There was no general alarm sounded at all, leaving many lower-deck passengers completely unaware of the looming danger. And finally, crew members operated under the tragic misconception that the ship's davits couldn't hold the weight of fully loaded boats. Because of this fatal misunderstanding, the already too few lifeboats were launched at an average of only 60% capacity. As the night wears on, the bow fills with water, lifting the massive stern into the air. At 2:18 a.m., the tremendous stress on the hull causes the ship to violently split in half. By 2:20 a.m., the Titanic sinks completely. Now, the survival rate was heavily skewed. For the first and second class passengers, 45% perished in those freezing waters, while 55% managed to survive in the lifeboats. But that 45% death toll for the upper classes jumps dramatically when we look further down into the ship. To put this into a stark, devastating perspective, 75% of all third-class passengers died, and a staggering 78% of the hardworking crew perished. This exposes how disproportionately the lower classes and the working crew were impacted by the disaster. Part 5. Aftermath and Legacy. A Shattered Glamour. At 3:30 a.m., about an hour after the ship sank below the waves, the Carpathia finally arrives rescuing 705 freezing survivors from the lifeboats. When they finally make it to New York City on April 18th, greeted by massive crowds, the news sends an absolute global shockwave. The pristine glamour of that maiden voyage was instantly shattered. But amidst all the cold statistics and the global shock, we find deeply poignant, very human moments. Isidore Straus, the president of Macy's, and his wife Ida were on board. Ida refused to leave her husband's side, and Isidore flatly refused to take a seat in a lifeboat while women and children still remained on the sinking ship. They chose to face the very end together, side by side. In the wake of this immense, unthinkable loss, the U.S. Senate inquiry, led by Senator William Alden Smith, forced sweeping, permanent changes to maritime law. They were absolutely determined to prevent this from ever happening again. Never again would a ship sail without enough lifeboats for every single passenger. A 24-hour radio watch was firmly mandated across the board, and an international iceberg monitoring service was established to constantly sweep the shipping lanes. On the corporate side, the fallout was pretty complex. J. Bruce Ismay, who survived in a lifeboat, was heavily vilified by the press and retired in shame a year later. The White Star Line struggled on. The Olympic actually had its watertight doors extended up to B-deck and successfully served as a troop transport in World War I. But the replacement ship, the Britannic, tragically struck a mine and sank in 1916. Eventually, by 1935, White Star's longtime rival, Cunard, acquired the struggling company. The whole shebang came full circle. For decades, the Titanic was just lost to the dark depths, an untouchable legend. That is, until September 1st, 1985, when oceanographer Robert Ballard, using the cutting-edge submersible Argo, finally discovered the wreck.
It was actually found 13 miles away from its last reported coordinates. Today, it rests heavily on the ocean floor, where it is slowly being dissolved away by iron-eating bacteria known as rusticles. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. As the ocean slowly dissolves the physical remains of the Titanic, what other hidden failures of modern ambition are we currently sailing toward blindly? The Titanic was the absolute pinnacle of technology in 1912, deemed wholly unsinkable until the exact moment it sank. It's a stark, powerful reminder to always question our own reliance on so-called unsinkable systems today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.